When We Disagree is a show about arguments, how we have them, why we have them, and their impact on our relationships and ourselves. Lots of public speeches begin with a quotation from a famous person, say Mark Twain or Abe Lincoln or Susan B. Anthony or some other luminary. On the one hand, this tactic can be a good way to capture the audience's attention and lend the speaker some credibility. On the other hand, these opening quotations are often a specific type of logical fallacy called an appeal to authority. The fallacy happens when someone argues that a claim is true simply because an authority figure or expert said it. But here's the catch. Just because someone's considered an expert doesn't automatically make their argument or advice valid. These kinds of appeals are everywhere. Think of celebrity endorsements. Think of old school cigarette ads with a picture of a doctor on it. Think of more modern toothpaste ads saying 4 out of 5 dentists prefer this brand. Let's say a popular fitness influencer with millions of followers posts a video saying something like, high repetition weight training 4 times a week is key to losing weight while building muscle. Somewhere, someone is thinking, maybe even subconsciously, well, this person looks great, made the claim really confidently, and has millions of followers, so they've succumbed to this influencer's tacit appeal to their own authority. Just because the influencer has a big platform doesn't mean their workout plan is scientifically proven or suitable for everyone. The argument is being accepted because of this person's position, maybe even this person's looks, not the actual merit of the advice. But the appeal to authority is really a tricky one. We need experts. We need good sources. We need credible methods to sort out complicated issues. But just by saying this, am I not appealing to authorities and thereby committing the same fallacy I'm discussing in real time? Here's the trick. We need to separate fake experts from real ones, charlatans from specialists, as well as people who know what worked for them versus people who have studied something from lots of different points of views, not just their own experience. What I'm talking about here is broad expertise as opposed to narrow, experience-based insight. Moreover, we need to watch out for over-investing in one expert. Let experts check other experts. Relying on authority figures without questioning their expertise or evaluating their evidence can lead us to make decisions based on popularity. Just because someone's famous or they've had some success with something doesn't mean their advice is universally reliable. I'm Michael Lee, Professor of Communication and Director of the Civility Initiative at the College of Charleston. Our guest on When We Disagree is Felicia Collaros. Felicia is the Vice President for Board Governance and Strategic Outcomes at St. John's College, and Felicia is the founder of DepolarWise.com, an educational platform to help people understand depolarization in the United States. Felicia, tell us an argument story.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael. I would be happy to. My argument story starts actually in 2018. It was, shortly after we were kind of getting into the mode of online cancel culture and having some ramifications as a school where we had a lot more accountability and voice through our online platforms that we just hadn't been prepared for before. Add to that we decided we wanted a lot more exposure for the school. So those two things accumulated into a very interesting event in summer of 2018, where we had 2 opportunities going, one which was overt and the other which was in progress. So the overt one was that I was part of the senior team that decided my then boss, President Mark Roosevelt, who is, yes, the great-grandson of Teddy Roosevelt and had run as a Democratic gubernatorial candidate. We decided he was going to appear on Tucker Carlson to talk up St. John's College.
Okay.
We also had in the background planned a visit from Frank Bruni from the New York Times, who was going to write an opinion piece about us. So in our mind, we were upholding the values of the college, which is that we strongly, are strong proponents of ideological diversity and talking across difference. But as you know, TV moves a lot faster than print. So we ended up announcing our president's appearance on Tucker Carlson far before the New York Times piece came out. And it was an absolute explosion on our social media sites. I became a face of that explosion, and that experience is something that stuck with me.
Okay, I have a lot of questions. Let's start at the beginning.
Yes.
St. John's, for those of us who don't know, St. John's is part of a great books tradition, if I'm not mistaken, and
Absolutely.
is a proponent of the liberal arts in the loosest sense of liberal, meaning lots of viewpoint diversity, lots of skepticism, lots of questions, almost like education based on dispute, debate, and the nurturing of controversy. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I would say we're in education, innovation, and disruption. So you take the curriculum through the history of time, starting from the ancient Greeks all the way, through Einstein. And you're really looking at beliefs, what people believe to be true at the time. And then this major disruption comes through and people recalibrate to that. And we see that recalibration in an integrated way. So we don't have specializations, we don't have majors. Everyone is forced to take the math, the sciences, the art, the history. And we see how that argument, basically, as history evolves, becomes this kind of churn of new ideas and new realities. So we think our alumni have a real grasp on how to deal with disruption, a real grasp on civil dialogue, and an education in democracy.
Right.
And so we were caught unprepared in many ways for what happened after the announcement.
And you're also, at the same time, dedicated to this curriculum, this history of argumentative thought curriculum. And you're also trying to curry some additional favor and get some good publicity for the school using that. And so you're taking opportunities to go on prominent talk shows with your president, et cetera. And so how did this interview with Tucker Carlson come about? Or did Tucker invite you on the show? What was the backstory there?
Yes. So we were pitching simultaneously, again, according with our values, different ideological platforms, right? So again, the New York Times was one of them and Fox was another one of them, so that we could reach a broad-based audience. We want to be a place that is welcoming of different families from different backgrounds, because we feel like every student should be able to find a home at St. John's. This curriculum is for them. We want to welcome them.
So before your president, Mark Roosevelt, goes on Tucker, what happens?
Well, we announce that we are going on Tucker. Now, I will say the only good thing about it was that it was very shortly before the appearance. So we didn't announce this, and that's pretty typical because, that kind of prominent media outlet, things can change. You don't know it's locked in until it's locked in. So I would say it was maybe like 24 to 48 hours before the actual appearance. And this is, again, I would, for context, 2018, this is a time at which Tucker Carlson had shortly taken over this show. And it wasn't the Tucker we came to know later that was even too extreme for Fox News. So we thought that this was a prominent media outlet. We were going to reach millions of viewers, and we were going to also have, points of view from other media outlets that would be coming out.
And how did you become the face of this?
So I think partly it was because I, although I had a career in corporate philanthropy and association management, I was an alumna of the college. And I had been president of the Alumni Association before I actually came and took a position as a vice president there. And I was on all of our social media platforms as a volunteer, and then as a Alumni Associate president, and then as a staff person. I was kind of somebody who interacted a lot with our alumni through those mediums. The other answer is, I think no one else attempted to go into that fray and steer the conversation. Yeah. So I just remember hours of, on the one hand, personal attacks, which was new for me. I'd kind of been used to an environment where you address ideas and disagree about ideas and context, not the personal attacks. That was a revelation. And then after the kind of explosion on social media from our alumni on the left, our parents and alumni on the right began to write in, mostly through email, saying, if this is the community you're creating, we're considering withdrawing our students, we're considering withdrawing our donations. So now you have both populations, because we are a very ideological, diverse school, coming in and seeing this event as a real fracture to our community.
Just to get a flavor of the arguments that you're dealing with, what was being said by your more liberal alums? What was being said by your more conservative alums?
Right. I think another thing I was unprepared for was that society had taken a turn into a mentality that conversation is complicity.
Mm-hmm.
And so here we are in the first Trump administration, right? There's a lot of sensitivity around that. Our president, by even appearing on Tucker Carlson, was somehow endorsing views from the right, views from the Trump administration that our alumni on especially the farthest left spectrum found abhorrent. And just being in conversation was a way of validating this position that they found was just unacceptable.
That's right. There's kind of an associative guilt that we assume in this culture where we're trending towards some kind of personal and tribal purification, where if you and I are friends, but then I learned that one of your friends' friends did something that I find politically disagreeable, then I have to unfriend all of you. Otherwise, risk validating the whole project by dint of my association with you 4 degrees removed from Kevin Bacon and so forth.
Yes, absolutely. That was the era. That was the burgeoning era,
Yeah.
right? I think in retrospect now we see like, oh, it all kind of has a continuity of what happened to our culture. But at that moment, it was emerging and a bit, shocking and discombobulating that that's where we come. Mind you, our president, Mark Roosevelt, had run as a Democrat in Massachusetts. He was ready to go on Tucker Carlson and have a little bit of a fisticuffs with him, but nobody has this context. They're just knowing that he's appearing on the show and that therefore that validates the show, that validates the network, that validates a point of view that they highly disagree with.
Yeah.
I would say the community on the more right side of the spectrum, just maybe they got caught up in that emerging narrative also that schools were swinging extremely left and that the comments on social media they were seeing were just proving we were producing some kind of population or mindset in this direction. They suddenly felt not welcome at the school if that was the kind of tenor and tone of the alumni body. And again, we're seeing a piece in any one of these moments. We're seeing a slice of a very vocal group, whether it's on the right or on the left. But that becomes kind of emblematic of what St. John's community is. And so looking at that from different perspectives, you were either angry or afraid and feeling like this wasn't your school anymore.
Did you feel like these communities had anything in common? I mean, they obviously have different icons and saints, and they feel differently about the then president and future president, and Tucker Carlson, and maybe taxation and military policy and all sorts of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But was there anything that united them, either in the way they argued or what they argued about or what their ultimate goals were?
They're incredibly smart people.
Uh-huh.
Here's the thing. We produce alumni that are incredibly discerning, very articulate, very capable, right? And have a sense of courage that they can tackle anything because we make them tackle anything when they're here at the school. So to send those people out in the world with kind of a fearlessness and a confidence that they have discerned reality correctly, that's a fun thing to get back at you once they're out, because they are very smart people. I think what surprised me the most was the more ad hominem attacks that were, you should be ashamed of yourself. Those kind of things didn't feel in keeping or in character with our alumni body. So we have, two burgeoning, two very ideologically diverse sides of this, both of them very smart, very articulate, have cases to explain how they're feeling, have complaints about how we've handled it, have complaints about what the school was that they thought their school was and now is not. And then I think for me, it was just I had a naivete. And the naivete was, if you spend 4 years at this college or more, you are going to somehow be inoculated against fear, aggression, herd mentality. You're going to be above that. And so to really reckon with the fact that we are just as vulnerable to these societal trends and this tribalism as anyone else, and that really having a civil dialogue mentality or depolarization mindset is a daily practice. It's not that you go somewhere, you get inoculated, you come out,
Right.
and now you're able to kind of transcend society. We're all human. And I think that recognition for me of that humanity brought with it a sense of compassion that, I was dealing with humans that were in pain. That's another thing that they had in common on both sides, that they somehow were in pain, and that was more important than anything maybe I was experiencing personally. Could I help with that? Maybe was my question, and
Yeah.
not just be feeling somehow assaulted or somehow diminished in my role in engaging with these communities.
Well, how'd the interview go?
So, funnily, the interview went fine. There wasn't, first of all, it's network television, it's short. There were some questions about what St. John's did and why it did it that way. And, really gave Mark Roosevelt a platform to talk about the school. And Tucker Carlson was very complimentary, which that's a double-edged sword.
Okay.
And then
Yeah.
the interview ended with President Roosevelt saying, well, Tucker, I think we probably disagree on everything else, but it's good to know we agree on St. John's College.
Okay. Huh.
So I would say the reaction to the interview was interesting. There were people that actually had the grace to come back and say, you were right, we should have just waited and saw it, and withheld our reaction until the interview was actually out there. There was others who disappeared, and I, didn't
Yeah.
ever engage with them again.
Well, I think I might know the answer to this question before I ask it, but I'm going to ask it anyway, which is, was it worth it? And I mean, was it worth it on two levels? First, was it worth it politically in terms of the blowback or potential bad PR that you got both nationally and with your alums who seems like they were kind of stirred up in a hornet's nest there? And then also, was it worth it ideologically, in the sense of, was this a good example of broad-minded, controversy-nurturing, debate-seeking civil dialogue?
Right. I think that answer may be very different at the time and very different in hindsight, right? So in hindsight, when you know the terminus point of what happened to Tucker Carlson, and there's maybe more, we would maybe have made a different calculation in 2022 than we made in 2018, right? At the time in 2018, I think what was worth it was that we were walking the talk. And so it is it's much easier to say that you're an ideological diverse community and that you believe in civil discourse. And it's a much different thing to stick your neck out there and do it. So I think that we did get, I will tell you, from a more mercenary perspective, it had its positive effect in terms of awareness, visits to our website, kind of, like putting us on the map in a way we hadn't been before. And then the New York Times piece coming just a couple months later bookended that. So we were on the map in a way the college never had been before, and getting more interest, more applications, more views than we ever had before. So I think that prominence from just a basic business perspective, you can't buy that we couldn't buy that PR. We are a small college on a budget.
Sure.
We couldn't buy that PR. So it was worth it from an exposure standpoint, and just elevating the college to a level of attention that we'd never seen before in both the left and the right. Was it worth it from a culture standpoint? My view on that is, if it wasn't the Tucker appearance, it would have been something else. It is very difficult to hold together an organization that is a proponent of ideological diversity. And in this time, I'm hoping that the time will swing back to a different time. But during those years, between 2018 and throughout the pandemic, there was going to be a trigger point, a flashpoint in our community that is so diverse. We're not a school that takes a political stand. And there are those schools that are much more avowedly on the left or the right. We were trying to walk a center line, and we were trying to demonstrate what that looks like. And that at some point was not going to be easy.
Yeah, that sort of gets me to both a practical and a philosophical question, which is about the limits of ideological diversity. You've said a few times that this choice in 2018 to go on Tucker Carlson's show might have been different in 2022, which implies that there is kind of some limit to the
Mhm.
associations that you're willing to curry, the things you're willing to expose your college students and presidents to, which then implies that there at some point viewpoint diversity becomes too diverse.
That is the rub, isn't it? And I know personally that I'm struggling with the answer because it's very personally important to me
Yeah.
of how we dignify humanity in everyone without dignifying maybe a position or a stance like misinformation or prejudice that you don't want to be a proponent of, right? That you actually want to work on the to end.
Yeah.
And so that to me is it's a fundamental question of our age is how do we separate human dignity from the kind of complicity, the kind of like over tolerance of destructive forces in society. That's very, very tough.
Yeah, and just to take sort of y'all's point of view right back at you, which is to say that if conversation is not complicity, then going on any person's show is not dignifying misinformation, is not endorsing the broader swath of their opinions that they share when you're not in conversation with them. And is also this issue of platforming that you were talking about. We have a problem of persuasion as well, which is how do we reach the very people that we need to reach if we don't go where they are? And that means that you have to
100%.
sometimes go on television shows or talk shows or podcasts and speak to people
Yeah.
with whom you might have horrific disagreements with. And so my point is, and this is again kind of taking y'all's point back at you on this question of whether you would go on Tucker in 22 or Tucker in 24 or Tucker in 25,
Mhm.
which is to say that if you're trying to walk the talk, as you say, then it's actually where you walk the talk best is where you have to make the most difficult determinations about whether to go on somebody's potentially problematic show. So going on Tucker in
Yes.
22 or 24 is actually more an example of walking the talk than it would have
Mhm.
been in 18.
I think that's true. And I wonder, it's funny in that kind of alternative reality, would we ended up making the same decision? We may
Yeah.
have. It may have just
Yeah.
been a harder decision to make, and we would have had to told our narrative to ourselves again in a more powerful way. It was easier, to your point, easier to make that decision in 2018, despite the kind of implosion that we had on both sides of our community through that experience.
Right.
But yeah, those decisions are getting harder.
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that how you described it is the right way to think about it is that conversation is the bare minimum that we can do to have a collective reality and a collective direction to solve problems, right? So if we are going to change our perspectives on both sides, that there's no way to do that without being in some kind of relationship. We need to be in relationship, and that how to be in relationship without conversation, it doesn't seem possible to me.
Yeah. And it is a kind of recognition of the political landscape that we live in too, which is to
Mm.
say we often like to think of these things as red states, blue states, political tribes, Republicans, Democrats, et cetera. And those are really
Mhm.
massive, important differences, mega identities, some have theorized. But there's also a kind of liberalism versus illiberalism, an openness to dispute, debate, conversation amongst disagreement, civility, wide exposure, curiosity, humility on the one side, and then a more shut off, cloistered, cancellatory, restrictive, tribalized view on the other side. And that illiberalism, the force of illiberalism, can exist on the left and the right. In other words, it's not a red state, blue state thing. It is the kind of Ouroboros where the snake eats its tail, and it's really difficult to see differences between the left and right.
That's absolutely true. I think that we need to recognize, no matter what our political ideology is, the vulnerabilities of that tribalism. It is
Yeah.
not just existing on one side or the other. This experience was profound to me, and it actually started to deepen my desire to do something like depolarize.com, because I'd been kind of always resistant to that deep political identity. When I registered to vote, I registered as an independent at 18. There was something about just this idea of alliance in a way that is so like part of your identity that had always been a little uncomfortable to me. I come to learn not until around 2016, when my mother started speaking about it more, that our legacy in Colombia was grandparents. One was a liberal and one was a conservadora. They married at a time when the partisan, antipathy in Colombia was a little bit less. But as the conflict between these two groups, the conservatives and the liberals, increased to the point at which 200,000 people died and Bogota burned, which is now called the La Violencia. They were in a mixed marriage and could not keep their family safe. They were going from a liberal town to a conservative town, and there was really no place anymore where people weren't being purged in some way or the other because of their political identity. Now, there's a lot of identity stacking there. Academics have stripped it apart to find out what role class played, what role race played, what role regional identity played. But the macro conflict was between liberals and conservatives. And I come from a family who was trying to do that in their one household between two people who are in a marriage. And so I see the conflict as both very relevant now, but also in a continuity of what has happened to humanity before, when we fail to recognize that under those identities, there are human beings who require human dignity. When we start letting go of that and let the kind of prejudices and the hatred, or what we call now affective polarization, take away that human dignity, what is possible, as we saw in Colombia, is incredibly dark. And so how do we get out of that pattern? And I think it is back to what you're saying about being in relation, having conversations, trying to not completely X out a particular human or a side that we're not going to engage with because we've dehumanized them. So that is something that I think is present on my mind as I work toward depolarize.com and try to work toward increasing understanding of really the destructive forces of viewing your political party as a religion and thinking that it can do no wrong.
You have an intergenerational, international perspective on civility, dialogue, the importance of debate and curiosity, but you also, it's informed clearly by your ideological commitments at St. John's, and then your practical experience with this, ranging from this decision whether or not to go on Tucker Carlson's show and many others. As you look towards the next encounter with difference, as the next difficult dialogue, what lesson or lessons from these experiences that you've recounted here stand out?
I think the first one really is this idea that there is no good side and no evil side, right? We have to just start there. And that's going to, clearing that out allows you to have curiosity and not be so fragile when you're intersecting with somebody of the opposite viewpoint, right? It is not about people that do not deserve to be. It is about people who have different life experience and have had different relationships, come from a different family, that there's a real fundamental creation of a person that may be, like Jonathan Haidt might say in his Righteous Mind book, that there's something that fundamental about people's identity that starts with the family they're in, the location, the region that they live, that there's some fundamental things. So dividing political parties in good and evil and thinking your side can't do wrong or the other side can't do right, that's got to be the first thing that goes if you're going to move forward here. I think the second thing for my personal development was to understand that this never ends. There's not a point at which you've done enough work as a collective or as an individual where you can say we're somehow immune or beyond this kind of societal fracture that's happening, and we can just rest on our laurels and not have to do the hard work of re-engaging yourself and your community in these depolarization and bridge building strategies. And thinking now about depolarization mindset, much in the way that we think about meditation or we think about other practices that are ongoing, that are really daily practices. It's that reminding of self of other people's human dignity, giving that to them, reminding yourself about your own fallibility, that you're missing information and there's no possible way that you're right about all your conclusions. So be curious. That is an ongoing thing we need to remind ourselves about, and come at it with a humility, so that we're not pulled into kind of blind spots that can also dehumanize others.
Filosha Collaros, thank you so much for being on When We Disagree.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation. You're doing good work. Keep it up. And I look forward to adding When We Disagree to depolarize.com. You're definitely part of this bridge building circle, and we need everyone to be part of it.
Thank you. When We Disagree is recorded at the College of Charleston with creator and host Michael Lee. Recording and sound engineering by Jesse Kunz and Lance Laidlaw. Reach out to us at whenwedisagree@gmail.com.